welcome to another edition of the AfterBuzz. How's everybody doing? I hope your Wednesday is going fantastic. If you're listening to this after Wednesday or watching this after Wednesday, I hope whatever day it is fantastic to you. So we got a few different topics that we'll be covering on today's AfterBuzz. And of course, as always, if you want to get involved in the YouTube chat, if you are watching this live, which happens every Wednesday, 10:30 Mountain Time on the KLAQ YouTube channel, you're more than welcome to bring stuff up in the YouTube chat that can be discussed. It could be comments, it could be questions, and such. But some of the stuff I wanted to talk about was first topic has to do with Impractical Jokers, which if you've never heard of the show, it's on True TV. It's a great show that I recently got back into because I think it was over the 4th of July vacation we took. We were just kind of hanging out in the hotel room, and that was something that we were able to watch with the kid that was funny. And it got better because I remember when Impractical Jokers first came out. It's been probably 6-7 years, I think. And I enjoyed it at first, but it seemed like every single joke and every single bit was a guy wearing an earpiece, and then they had to repeat whatever they were being told by, one of the other guys. And it was always one of those situations of it was a micro penis joke, and it got old. Like it seemed like it was the same thing every single time. But if you haven't checked it out recently, it's goddamn hilarious, and it's brilliant. And one of the bits that they were doing was you had to they kind of section off an area of the grocery store, and if a customer is inside that area, that means that they're in the field of play. And the whole point was you needed to see how many times you could go up to somebody and get a sticky note placed on their back. Great bit, was hilarious, and so of course the kid wants to, impersonate Impractical Jokers, which she just calls Jokers because she doesn't actually see the impractical part on the title. So she decides, she's like, let's play Jokers, let's play Jokers. So we're sitting in the house, and she's deciding that she wants to then take some of her stickers and put them on her back. The only problem is, A, she's doing it while it's on TV, so she just walks up to us, and she comes up to me, and she goes, hey, Daddy, what's on TV? And then she starts slapping my back, so it's kind of obvious what she's doing. But if that's not enough, once she's done, she gets up and she goes to walk away. She turns around, she goes, I just put a sticker on your back. So clearly we need to work on a few things with the kid there in regards to, the things that she's seeing on TV. If she wants to impersonate him, it really doesn't work out too well if you tell somebody exactly what you just did when it's supposed to be a secret. So anyway, another TV show, it's Shark Week going on this week, and Shark Week lost me a long time ago. I remember watching Shark Week in the early 90s when I was a kid, and it was awesome. It was all about the sharks, and you got to see these, these cool shows and videos. But if you watched Shark Week enough, it started to get repetitive. It's kind of the same complaint that I guess I had for Impractical Jokers. Obviously, with Shark Week, it's not micro penis jokes. It was the same shows every single year. They would just add some new footage, so you're watching pretty much the same hour of program with 5 minutes changed at the end, let's say. And I started to notice that, and after a while I'm like, you know what, this is boring me, and I have absolutely no desire. And then I think it was probably 10 years ago maybe where people were like, yeah, Shark Week is awesome, even though it had been around for 20 years. And it's like, you guys are just now getting into Shark Week when it's the same crap that's been on. And they really lost me last year when they're promoting that whole Michael Phelps races a shark thing. Like in all honesty, when you think back, do we really think they were going to put Michael Phelps in a tank or in the ocean with a great white shark? No, absolutely not. They weren't going to do that. But people got duped into it. And shockingly, all they did was have him swim. All they did was target how fast a great white shark can swim. And then they CGI'd everything, and it turned out just to be a big steaming turd. So anyway, so Shark Week, it's happening now. If you're into it, cool. If there's a cool show, I'll definitely check it out. But Shark Week isn't anything, that I'm, going to plan my day around, to plan my week around. Something that had popped up earlier in the YouTube chat and also on the show today was we were talking about people complaining about TV shows. And one of the TV shows happened to be Insatiable, which I believe is going to be on Netflix. It hasn't been released yet. And the premise of the show is it's all about a girl who's overweight. She ends up getting her mouth wired shut, and then she drops a lot of weight. And people want to complain because they claim that it's fat shaming. And people also had a major problem with, 13 Reasons Why. They're saying it glorified or glorified suicide, or it painted suicide in a positive light. I don't really see how it did that. And the bigger issue for me is if it starts an actual conversation about a pretty serious topic like suicide. And unfortunately for me, I've known enough people in my life who have attempted suicide and failed, and attempted suicide and completed the task. So it's not like I'm, talking out of my ass here, and I've not been anywhere around it whatsoever. But if it's starting a conversation where you can talk to somebody who maybe is going through something, or they have had those thoughts, then by all means, I'm for it. But I think generally what we're getting are the people who feel the need to be offended by something are the ones who are getting offended by these things. They're saying that these need to be taken down, when maybe the premise of the show isn't the way real life should be patterned, which, by the way, I hate to break this to everybody, but TV is not real life. Even reality TV is not real life. But if you're looking to pattern your life around a television show, that's probably step number one, that you need to reevaluate your life and figure out, hey, this is probably not the best thing for me. But if it starts the actual conversation of maybe, you have body image issues, or maybe, you are overweight, or maybe you're underweight, maybe you have an eating disorder. There's all these different topics that should be discussed. And if the show is entertaining and it leads to these discussions, then I'm 100% for it. Now, you might not believe, like, oh, well, in the show, they're fat shaming, so the show should be canceled. Pull your head out of your ass, because it's a show. You have to realize that. But if it starts an actual conversation, then it's leading to something positive. And then by you saying that the show should be canceled and the show should not be released simply because of that, you're hindering the progress. You're the idiot that's literally stopping progress because you're too offended, because you believe that a television show is reality when it's not. So just ease off being offended for shit, I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes, and realize, hey, if it's starting a conversation, it could be doing some positive in the world. And then, here in the YouTube chat, there's everybody talking about, everybody being too PC, and everybody easily getting offended. And that's the thing that, I think that we are at that pendulum has swung too far. Like, we have gone too PC. We have gone to the point where, it's if you're offended, you immediately think you're right. I think I covered this in last week's AfterBuzz. It's time to stop. It's time to stop being so offended by everything, but realize that conversations do need to be had. There are some very serious issues out there. If a TV show is going to start that conversation, shut the fuck up about complaining about it and have the actual conversation about the actual issue, and shut the fuck up about pulling the show off of the air. It's not worth it. You are the one that is hindering all progress whatsoever because you're too butthurt to move on. Anyway, moving on to the next topic. Another thing that had kind of been brought up earlier this week, I think it was just in the YouTube chat, or maybe I think we brought up something on the show about it, and we were talking about disability stickers and people parking in disability spots and things like that. And it reminded me of a story with my mom, who she was her knee was shot. Actually, both her knees were completely shot. I mean, she could barely move around. It was one of the reasons I moved back to Oregon, was because, she lives in a 2-story home and she couldn't get up and down the damn stairs. And it was at that time she needed the disability sticker, but she wasn't given one. Then she goes and has the surgery. She has both knees completely replaced. Now she doesn't have that issue getting around because both knees have been replaced. It's not bone on bone, just sitting there digging and she's limping around everywhere. But now is when she's gotten the disability sticker. So, and I don't know if maybe she missed something, or if she was able to go to the doctor and say, hey, like, I can't walk, and she just missed out on that opportunity. But my understanding was you didn't get it until after you had the surgery, when the really messed up part of that whole situation was She needed it before the surgery because you didn't want her lugging around, on these bum knees halfway through a parking lot. She was the person that you wanted to be able to park up front because she could barely walk. I remember we ended up having um, what was it when we went to New York? I think it was in 2010, and this is when her knees were really first starting to go bad. And there was a huge snowstorm. My family got snowed well, they didn't get snowed in Denver, but they had to stay in Denver because the whole Northeast was snow and a sheet of ice. And I remember just that whole trip when everybody finally got to New York and we're lugging around and we're hoofing it through New York City. It kind of had to be right there on my mom's side because like it's a sheet of ice, and when you have two good knees, it was it was difficult to walk around the city of New York, let alone having two bad knees at that point. Um, so, anyways, I thought that was an interesting story, and there are a lot of people in here in the YouTube chat who do talk about disability stickers and people who park in a disability zone and not having the disability sticker. The story that always pops into my brain that makes me laugh though is from The Simpsons when Homer, I think he pulls into the Quickie Mart and he covers it's either 2 or 3 handicap spots because he parks sideways, and then when he gets out of the car, he just starts dragging his right leg like he can't move his right leg. Fucking hilarious. Um, Okay, so a couple more things here to get to on this week's AfterBuzz. Again, if you guys want to bring anything up in the YouTube live chat, you're more than able to do that. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can always get involved in the YouTube chat. It's 10:30 Mountain Time on the KLAQ YouTube channel. You can watch it live. If you're watching this live, if you want to go back to it, or if you do miss one, they do save on YouTube if you want to watch it, or if you're cruising around in your car, or if you're working out and you just want to listen to it, by all means, we are updating them for the podcast because we still get questions about the Buzz Adams Morning Show podcast. It's been a couple of months now where we haven't been able to do one from the show, and quite frankly, it's because of copyright issues. The difficulty has been that we play a lot of things on the show, sound clips from TV shows, music, and stuff like that we have the rights to on the air, but in regards to saving something and then rebroadcasting it as a saved broadcast, either on YouTube or as a as a podcast, we don't have the rights to do that. So we've had to kind of put the kibosh on that until we kind of figure some things out there. So anyway, we do have the podcast going up. It's available on iTunes. It's also available on Google Play. I try to get them up shortly after this airs. And one of the issues I'd run into is I was saving things kind of incorrectly when I was doing the when I was saving the podcast. So for some reason, the first 3 weeks of the AfterBuzz podcast, it was the same podcast because I wasn't doing it properly. So hopefully at this point, if you've reached now, the 4th episode of the AfterBuzz being on the podcast, and it's not the same one, you're actually hearing this version of the AfterBuzz. One of the other topics that I was talking about in the YouTube chat today, I had to leave the show very briefly, because my goddamn radiator blew up yesterday. So I'm cruising home, stop and get gas. Everything's fine with the car. I'm planning on taking care of a bunch of wedding things during the day, and then I get home. I pull my car into the garage, and as I'm walking around my car, there's smoke just billowing out from underneath the hood, and I'm like, God damn it! So I pop open the hood and I look, and it looks like there's just coolant everywhere, all over the inside. So I just kind of gave my dad a quick call to be like, hey, like this is what's going on. You think it's just a hose, or what do you think the deal is? And he told me, he was like, yeah, he goes, hopefully it's just, a hose popped loose, or maybe a hose broke and it's just leaking coolant, and that's all the problem is. So I was able to get my car to go pick up the kid yesterday. She's only, maybe a mile, 2 miles away, bring her back home. And then I was able to get to work just fine this morning. And then I went and dropped it off. That's why I had to leave, because I wanted to get that car in right when the shop next to the station opened up. So I wanted to give them enough time to make sure everything gets done. And I find out, like, no, it's not a hose. It was the actual radiator blew. So now I got all day without a car. So I got to figure out how I'm going to get around and all that fun stuff without my car today, and then I got to pay for a new radiator and all that. And everybody in the YouTube chat kept saying like, "Oh, you got to make sure you're not going to get screwed. You got to make sure you're going to somebody you trust." I trust the guys that work next door because that's where I take my car. It's where I get all my oil changes done on my car. It's where I take care of everything. And uh, there was one day where, when I first moved to El Paso, I had somebody had rotated the tires prior, and then when I got here, I took it over there to get the tires rotated and get the oil changed. And the problem was the last person who tightened the lugs on, they were in there, and it was popping the actual bolts off. Like they weren't able to just get them off, so they had to replace all of that crap. And I was frustrated because I'm shit. Like I was expecting this to be done at this point. I can't believe it. Now I don't know what I'm going to do. I got all these things I got to do. So I'm just kind of like venting out loud. And the guy was like, "Don't worry about it." He goes, "We've ordered the parts. We're not going to charge you for the parts. We'll put the tires back on. Everything's just going to be exactly what you wanted. It's just going to be the oil change. It's just going to be the tire rotation. We're not going to charge you the parts for the bolts and everything like that. But we'll get it done. It is going to take longer than usual." And he reaches into his pocket, and then he hands me his keys, and he goes, "Take my car for the day." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, it's the white car. It's right over on the side. Just take it for the day. Just bring it back." I'm like, "Cool." So there you go. So that's why I trust those guys over there. Like he's always been very trustworthy. He tells you exactly how it is. If there's something extra that maybe need to be done to your car just to make sure you're not going to run into an extra problem. Like with the radiator, we're replacing the radiator, going to replace the thermostat as well. And he told me, he goes, "We're going to check for everything else just to make sure that this isn't going to be one of those situations where you leave and then a week down the road, your radiator blows again because we didn't catch something." He's like, "We're going to look and we're going to search inside the car and make sure that everything's good to go." And he goes, "We're not going to charge you for that labor. Like, don't worry about it. It's just the parts and the labor for swapping out the radiator." So yeah, like they're super cool over there next to the car shop that's right here next to the station. So that dude gained a customer for life when he did that to me, like especially when he handed me the keys to his car. And he's like, "Just take my car, man." He's like, "We're good to go for the day." I'm getting questions about the El Paso references on the morning show. Okay, so here's what that's about. And there's somebody trying to make the comment that it had something to do with me talking about Impractical Jokers at the beginning of the show that had absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm not sure how you made that connection. But we were in our meeting on Monday, and we get some sponsorships in. And if you listen to the YouTube stream, you get the version of the show that broadcasts here in El Paso. You're not getting the broadcast that's in San Angelo. You're not getting the broadcast that's in Abilene. It's the home base show here. And this is why when people complain like, "Oh, they're just playing more commercials." No, we're not. We've played the exact same amount of commercials every show for 3 years now. And you have to do that when you're on a syndicated show because you have to have everything timed out properly. So what happens is, we have like basically when we go into commercials, I hit a button. And when I hit that button, that means the computer in Abilene and the computer in San Angelo take over, and it runs their commercials because obviously we don't want local commercials, or they're not going to want our El Paso commercials on their stations. Like we have our own inventory that we sell. So I hit this button, their computers take over, and that's when the clock starts. And there's a very specific amount of time, which is why everything needs to be timed out properly, which leads into why Buzz needs to pay attention to the clock and break on time. And I'll get to the whole him leaving the show early today here in just a minute. Just remind me in the YouTube chat to bring it up. So that starts the clock. And one of the things that we have to do is we have sponsorships for certain segments of the show. We've got like a sponsorship for True Crime Report. We've also got a sponsorship for the Rock Report. And we have what's called a Local 90 in our break. And you'll notice this when you listen to the show, especially if you're on the YouTube chat or if you're watching the YouTube live stream. There will be a part when we come out of commercials and you hear us talking about things we're doing here, specifically in El Paso. It can be any of the events coming up, like the Mexican Food Fiesta. It could be about the KLAQ app. It's KLAQ specific things, and that happens for 90 seconds. And it has to be exactly 90 seconds because it's in that amount of time that needs to be perfect so that when the computers in Abilene and San Angelo are done and it comes back to us, we're not still talking about El Paso things. So when we read these sponsors, those happen in the local 90s because that's what the advertiser has purchased. They haven't purchased the syndicated morning show airtime. They purchased local airtime. So they they have to happen in the local 90, and the Buzz keeps complaining about it because he's like, "Well, I don't understand why I can't just, read those over the network." Quick, information session here. Network is what we consider the whole show that's broadcast on all of the stations. That's the Buzz Adams Morning Show network, and so he keeps bringing that up. And he brings it up every few weeks, and it really has more to do with the fact that he forgets in the local 90, but then when he gets to the True Crime Report or we get to the Rock Report, in his brain he's like, ah, shit, I forgot to do the sponsor. So it's easier for him to just remember it then than to actually have to remember it when he's scheduled to do it, because it doesn't have anything to do with Buzz making it so that we do things properly. It's whatever makes it easy for Buzz, because that's the way his brain works. It's the same thing with the clock. He doesn't want to have to pay attention to the clock simply because it's easier for him to just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and then break whenever he feels like it. It's not about what's easy for everybody or what sounds best for the show. It's whatever makes everything easy for him. Okay, I'm done knocking Buzz here at that point. He's really not that bad. Oh, well, he is when it comes to, paying attention to the clock, obviously. But anyway, I've turned this into a very long story. So we're in the meeting. He brings that up. We're talking about, why can't we read these sponsors over the network? And our boss is in there, and he's talking about, no, we can't do it because, we haven't sold them the network. We just sold them on the local stuff. And then he proceeds to go down this road of there's already too much El Paso talk anyway on the network. And if you were listening on Monday's show, we had a Nostradamus joke that referenced the red parrot. Now, when Buzz wrote the joke, he even came into my studio and he's like, hey, when we go through this, can you make sure that you explain what the red parrot is? It's a strip club. It's a gentleman's club. It's a nudie bar, however you want to explain it, just because there are these two other cities, anybody else on YouTube who's not here in El Paso, that are listening to this that aren't going to understand the reference. So the second our boss brings this up, and the boss, it's not Kevin, by the way. That's the boss I'm talking about. So he brings that instance up because we asked him, we were like, well, what are you talking? Like, we don't think we talk about El Paso that much. And of course he brings up the red parrot reference. And we were like, yeah, we know, but like you're talking about like a 10-second joke that's not going to take away from the whole show. And we do a lot to make sure that we don't make it to El Paso. And this is where it sucks and where it's different. Where it's different for syndicated morning shows, because one of the big things that made Buzz very successful was how El Paso centric the show was. It was El Paso's home, like that. That's kind of what it was. But when you syndicate the show, you can't do that anymore. We ran into that when I was in Florida. We ran the Bubba the Love Sponge morning show, and he was based out of Tampa. And you want to talk about the epitome. You want to talk about the epitome of a guy keeping things so local and talking about things that nobody gives a crap about, and it just destroying the network. That guy's the perfect example. He dominated the Tampa ratings. Like, he was huge in Tampa, but he never got foot. And he was on even more stations. Like, he was on in our market, like 4 or 5 other stations. And when it came on the air, and he talked about Tampa so much, he talked about some other morning show guy in Tampa that he had some radio beef with. And if you're listening in Miami, you're like, I don't care about any of this. Like, I don't know the guy that he's talking about. I don't know these local stories that he's talking about. So there was all this stuff that was just kind of like, it was complete tune out. So we've been very cognizant of making sure we don't do that. And Buzz has been making sure that we also are, not doing too much about El Paso. One difference being on Friday, when that dude's semi truck he pitched it up that ramp and he took out that utility bridge. We talked about that, for a pretty good amount of time on Friday because if I remember correctly, it happened Thursday. So we talked about it on Friday, and and we warned everybody too. We were like, hey, like we know this is a pretty local story, but this is a big deal. Um, and so, we kind of, our boss is talking about how we talk about too much El Paso. And I'm very adamant. Like, I disagree with him on this point constantly. And he tries to tell me, well, I'm listening to the show as somebody who's from Abilene, or I'm listening to the show as somebody who's from San Angelo. And I'm like, that's bullshit. You can't do that. Like, you're literally just making it up. You're saying these words that aren't even an actual valid point. So I don't understand how you can make that claim. And to sit here and waste our meeting time by telling us we talk too much El Paso. So what I told him is, I go, the next time you're listening to the show, I want you to listen to a full show. And I want you to write down every single time we reference El Paso. And it's when we reference El Paso for the sake of El Paso, and it takes away from any of the other markets. If you're listening in Abilene, or if you're listening in San Angelo, or any other city on YouTube, you don't understand it, and it's a tune-out factor. Write that down and then come to us with those exact factors. Come to us with those exact times that all that happened. And it was just, he couldn't come up with it. So while all this is happening, Kevin is sitting there and he texts Frank Payne. Frank Payne in Abilene for Rock 108. And he flat out asked him, he goes, do you think the show is too El Paso centric? Do you think the guys talk too much about El Paso? And Frank's response that came back quickly was no. He had recently just been with somebody at one of the remotes that he was working, and this person had told him, the show is starting to grow on me. It's getting a lot better. And, I was actually glad that last Friday when they were talking about this bridge in El Paso, like they warned us like, hey, this is a big deal here in our city. And it wasn't a tune-out factor. It was completely fine. So, of course, everybody else in the room was just like, yes, that's a victory. And our boss kind of slumped back in his chair like, oh, I guess I was wrong. So anyway, back to the whole point of this story that I've now taken like 15 minutes on. So the whole point of the references for El Paso is I made a joke. I think it was Tuesday morning in our pre-show meeting. So it's before 5 a.m. local time. And we're talking about, like stories and things that we're going to talk about. And so what I said was, what I want to see us do on the show now. And so anybody listening to this AfterBuzz, if you're live here on YouTube or if you're, listening to it as the podcast, tune into the show live and listen for when we do this, because what we're doing now is I've told him, I go, when we reference Abilene, we reference Abilene. When we reference San Angelo, we reference San Angelo. But if there's a story about El Paso, or if we're talking about all three cities or whatever, we don't say the words El Paso. We just call it the city in which we live. So you'll hear us from time to time now. We'll be like, in San Angelo and Abilene and the city in which we live. So it's kind of an inside joke that we had started, which makes us chuckle. But that's the whole reference that people were asking about this morning, is why are you not referencing El Paso, or why are you stepping away from that? Which I know, especially if you don't tune in or you're not getting this explanation, that'll bug you if you live here in El Paso, because you think that we're specifically leaving out El Paso for some nefarious reason, when quite frankly for us, it's an inside joke. It's just called, the city in which we live is how we're going to be referencing El Paso from here on out. Oh, except for the 9 o'clock hour, because the 9 o'clock hour is specific to El Paso. Dead Side in the YouTube chat right now says there's very little El Paso talk on the show. The only time I really hear El Paso talk is if they have a comedian or porn star in the visiting area. And that's what most people have said too, Dead Side. Like, there's a lot of people who are saying, I don't really hear El Paso references. Now, obviously, when we were talking about the story about the police officer that drew his gun on the kid, you're going to hear El Paso, like that. It's the city that it happened, but it was a nationwide story. Like, this thing was huge, which was especially an interesting take because My understanding was that the nationwide news was really just bashing this officer and how could you do that? You pulled a gun on these kids and, just absolutely, against this police officer when everybody hears like, look at these little shits. Like, these kids, not to say that it's okay he pulled a gun on him, but let's not, completely let these kids off the hook. And then I think it was, a week and a half, 2 weeks later, where these kids ended up, they were breaking into the toll booth at Escalante Park. It's like, it's interesting how you got the local story and then you've got this nationwide story, and it's skewed just completely dependent on what you want to report, or what you want the story to be about. Which, by the way, it's reporting these days. And you want to know why it's reporting these days? It's because there's advertisers. That's the bottom line. Like news reporting used to be news reporting when you weren't allowed to advertise during news broadcasts. Like that's the God's honest truth. When you weren't allowed to advertise during news, because that meant it was going to be unbiased. You didn't have advertisers who had their own interests. Like if GE is a major sponsor of your news broadcast, and GE just got busted for polluting Lake Erie with some plant that they have up there. By the way, I'm completely pulling this out of my ass and I'm making it up. At least the story. About GE. Do you think GE is going to be completely cool with like, oh no, you guys go ahead and just report it as is? No, they're going to try to do whatever the hell they can because, newsflash, money rules all. Your vote when you go to the booth, it doesn't really mean that much. You can think that it does. Local elections, it means a hell of a lot more than it does in national elections. But your ultimate vote all comes down to your money. Where do you spend your money? If you want to boycott, why else do you think the NFL and their anthem policy, why do you think they did that? Because there was people with money. Mainly, it was actually the viewers. It wasn't advertisers or anything, but it was the viewers, these middle-class white people who were upset of these guys kneeling, where the actual reason they were kneeling got construed with what people wanted to believe. They weren't protesting the flag. They weren't protesting the military. They were protesting other things, but that got lost in the storylines. And since the people with the money were louder and saying, we're going to stop watching, we're going to stop spending money, the NFL had to backtrack and think, well, shit, how do we say this? Which, of course, it's weird because the NFL wants this thing to go away, but the NFL keeps getting in its own way. And they keep, like with the Miami Dolphins, coming out with all of these different stories about how like the Dolphins, like this is how they would punish them. It's just to me, to this point, it's a lot of the stories where they just keep coming back up, and I'm like, I don't care. If they want to kneel, let them kneel. I understand if it offends you. I understand if you're a veteran who fought for this country and it upsets you that they're not willing to respect the flag in that way. I completely understand it. I also understand there's lots of veterans out there who are saying, this is the reason why I fought for that flag, was to give them the right to protest the flag. But quite frankly, at this point, I really don't care. And the NFL is wearing thin on me, and I'm not sure how much I'm going to pay attention. I'll still follow the Patriots. That's my team. I don't think I'm going to be playing any fantasy football this year because I'm worn out on the NFL. I think they've oversaturated it to this point, and I think that it's become they're just a running joke. And I think that you're about to see the downslide of the NFL over the next 10 years or so. Like the NFL, I think, has almost reached its peak. And I think that you're about to see the viewership continue to dip. And I think that you're going to start to see them scramble to be like, well, shit, what do we do now at this point? Because we got to figure out how to keep these viewers coming in. I think the CTE thing is going to be a major issue with it because you're going to start to see the results of parents not letting their kids play. Because a parent's not going to want their kid going out there smacking their head against some of the kid, no matter what kind of helmet that they're wearing. And so you're going to get to the point where it's going to be a lot of these talented kids are not going to be playing football simply because they never played it as a kid. So in 10 years, they're not going to be ready for the NFL. Like that's not the path that they would have chosen because there's a lot of NFL players now. There's a lot who are saying, I would go back and do it again the exact same way. There's also a lot who are saying, if I'd known the repercussions now, the fact that I'd barely be able to get out of bed, the fact that I can't remember what I need when I go into a room, the fact that I suffer from constant headaches, all of this stuff, I would never have gotten into football. And for me, like if I ever have a son, I would tell that kid, like, I don't want you playing football. I'm going to push him to other sports. I'm going to push him to something like baseball or soccer, basketball, something that you don't have to worry about the head trauma as much. Um, okay. Oh, so to wrap up this edition of the AfterBuzz, I will talk about why Buzz ended the show early today, because there's people in the YouTube chat who immediately noticed he wrapped up at about local time 9:52. Now we do know that we have to get in all the commercials, because what happens is if you have 5 minutes of commercials and you don't start that commercial stop set until 9:57, there's 3 minutes of commercials that technically run outside of the time that they were supposed to, so the advertisers can come to us and complain that, well, it didn't run the way I wanted, so I'm not going to pay. Like that happens. And that's the thing that we keep trying to tell Buzz. This is why you have to run on time, so that the commercials run in the allotted time that they're scheduled, that the client is paying for. Like if I was paying for it, I would complain about it. So I told him we had some commercials that we needed to run, and I told him in the talkback. Now, really quick, what the talkback is I push a little button, I can talk into my microphone, and then Buzz and everybody else, they can hear it through their headphones, but it doesn't get broadcast over the air. So I'm able to communicate with them where, I'm kind of leaning in. I'm like, hey, you've got until, I can't even remember what time it was. So he starts talking about the heat, and he's playing that heat bit about like how hot it is and things like that. And what he'll do for me to let me know, like, I'm ready to wrap up this bit, or this bit is ending, or ready to take a break, he puts his hand up. And then, like, sometimes he'll do a countdown, which is always wrong, by the way. It's always wrong. There could be 10 seconds left, and he'll start with 5 on his hand and go 4, 3, and then he'll hold it, and then he'll go 2, and then he'll hold it for like 4 more seconds, and then he'll really quickly point at me to let me know, like, hit the button to go into the commercials. Like, I don't understand how he still screws this up, but it's hilarious to me. So anyway, what ultimately ended up happening was I've taped the clock. He's got this giant clock in his studio, and I've taped it with yellow and red tape to let him know this is when, if you've reached this point, you don't start a new topic. If it's on the red line, you break now. The only time that's different is during the 9 o'clock hour, when we have a little bit more leeway to do things. He'd already forgotten what time I told him he needed to break. And he was looking at the clock. He saw the red line, and he immediately played it and pointed at me to end the show, and that was it. And so once we had done that, I hit the talk. I'm like, ended that a little bit early, didn't you? And he looks up and he goes, shit. He goes, he's like, I got distracted by the tape, and I thought I had to end it now. And we probably could have gone for another 3 or 4 minutes, I think, before having to wrap up the show. So there you go. So that's the exact reason that he needed to, or didn't need to, but he accidentally wrapped up the show early today. On that note, I'll give you guys about 30, 60 seconds in the YouTube chat if you're watching this live. If you guys want to bring something up. Bilbo's talking about an article about how helmet contact was avoided in the early days of the leather helmet, and how kind of the modern helmet is what has created these problems. And I agree 100% with that. I've been saying that for years. It's been at least 10 years that I've been saying this. If you got rid of the helmets, head injuries would go down. Are you more inclined to lower your head and try to hit somebody if you've got a big piece of plastic on your head, or if you have nothing on your head? You're more inclined to protect your head if you don't have the helmet on. And the reason I always brought that up was because the epitome of the guy who would lunge was Brandon Merriweather. He was a safety for the Patriots. I think he eventually went to the Bears. And he would lunge with the crown of his helmet, and like he wouldn't even go to tackle. Like his arms were almost at his side, or they'd be tucked under his chin like this, and he would lunge with the top of his head. And I think he ended up getting suspended for a couple of games in his career because this idiot didn't know how to tackle. And when are you more likely to want to do that? Is it when you have a helmet on, or when you don't have a helmet on? And the problem is, in our pursuit of safety, we've made the game more dangerous because you're putting these helmets on these guys. And I played a year of football. You're more inclined to put your body at risk when you have shoulder pads and when you have a helmet on. When back in the day, when you had maybe a leather helmet and you had some other things, you weren't as likely to end up putting yourself in those risky situations where you're going to collide into somebody with your head. But anyway, so that's a quick side story there. On that note, we will wrap up this edition of the AfterBuzz. Again, if you're listening to this on the podcast, or if you're rewatching it on YouTube, you can always get involved live, 10:30 Mountain Time on the KLAQ YouTube channel every Wednesday. If you miss one, you want to re-listen to one, or you want to rewatch it, it does save to YouTube. You can always go back and rewatch it on YouTube. Or if you're in your car and just want to listen to me, ramble on for 30 minutes, by all means, you're more than welcome to do that as well. It's iTunes and Google Play. It's up under the Old Buzz Adams Show podcast. They're just labeled now the AfterBuzz, but the logo's the same. If you already subscribed to the Buzz Adams Show podcast, they should be popping up there. If there's any problems with anything, or if you notice there's a mistake or anything like that, by all means, reach out to me. You can shoot me an email. It's brandon.coates, that's COATES, at townsquaremedia.com. And another really quick note, next D&D session we're hoping to get in August 1st. That would be next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. Nothing official as of yet. And I'll let you guys know on the morning show when we do. But right now it's looking like August 1st at 5 p.m. So Green Eyed Ghost, there's your heads up, because I don't think we've actually confirmed anything yet, considering the fact you're the one producing the show for us. On that note, I'll check you guys later. Have yourselves a good day. I got to go figure out how the hell I'm going to get home, because my car, it's not working right now. So peace out.